Not quite.
What if I told you Gondor wasn't just a fantasy kingdom, that it has a real-world parallel? One rooted in intrigue, religion, decline, and unreal complexity. You're probably imagining elves, dragons, and magic. But what if the real inspiration behind fantasy's greatest tropes was the Eastern Roman Empire? High fantasy is often viewed as purely escapist, grand tales from made-up worlds. But if you look closer, a surprising number of tropes, themes, and even aesthetics seem lifted straight from the 1,000-year history of the Eastern Roman Empire. From courtly intrigue and theological chaos to crumbling borders and lost legacies, Byzantium may just be the most influential fantasy world you've never read about. Today we'll explore how, consciously or not, the Byzantine Empire shaped high fantasy as we know it. Let's start with one of the genre's favorite themes, decline. Whether it's Gondor in The Lord of the Rings, Numenor in its final days, or the scattered remnants of the Malazan Empire, fantasy loves a once great civilization grappling with its own fading glory. Sound familiar? That's because it most likely is. The Byzantine Empire is the historical embodiment of that trope. Once the eastern half of the mighty Roman Empire, it inherited grandeur, infrastructure, and power. But over centuries, it watched territories vanish, enemies rise, and its legacy crumble. And yet it endured. For 1,000 years. The Byzantines never stopped believing in their imperial destiny, even as Constantinople shrank and power faded. Emperors still styled themselves as Roman rulers, protectors of Christendom, and heirs of Caesar. The myth of a golden past, and the desperation to restore it, is a driving force in both fantasy and Byzantine history. Fantasy loves ruins, ancient keeps, half-sunken cities, crumbling strongholds with echoes of lost power. That image is Byzantium in its twilight. Churches with broken mosaics, forgotten border outposts in the Armenian highlands, and emperors reigning from increasingly isolated palaces, such as Mistras in the Peloponnese. Fantasy worlds are deeply religious, but often divided. In Game of Thrones, you have the Faith of the Seven, the Red God, the Old Gods, all vying for dominance. The Wheel of Time features competing interpretations of prophecy and divine will. Even in the Stormlight Archive, Spren and Orders reflect fractured spirituality. Now imagine a world where theology sparked riots, emperors appointed patriarchs, and entire armies fought over whether Christ had one will or two wills. That's Byzantium. The Eastern Roman Empire saw countless theological disputes. Arianism, Nestorianism, Monophysitism, iconoclasm, and each one had political consequences. The iconoclast controversy alone lasted over a century, leading to civil unrest, court purges, and church burnings. These weren't abstract debates. They shaped emperors' policies and divided entire regions, with unending civil war and chaos. And fantasy echoes that. Religious zealotry, chosen ones, prophecy, and schism are everywhere. From the White Walkers being framed as a punishment from the gods, to the endless theological debates in Malazan over ascendants and divine roles.
Boring!
In both Byzantium and fantasy, faith isn't private, it's the spine of civilization. Fantasy thrives on scheming, nobles backstabbing each other, houses vying for the throne, whispers in candlelit corridors. Enter Varys, enter Littlefinger, enter every noble council from fantasy. But long before them, there was the Byzantine court. The palace in Constantinople was a labyrinth of intrigue. Eunuchs wielded enormous power. Emperors were blinded, deposed, or poisoned. Legitimate heirs clashed with usurpers. Bureaucrats and scholars could hold more sway than generals. The sheer complexity of Byzantine legitimacy and succession would make even Westeros blush. Consider Empress Irene, who ruled as emperor in her own right, and blinded her own son to take the throne. Or Michael VIII Palaiologos.
That's a lot of
Michaels.
Who had the child emperor John IV blinded and imprisoned after using him as a puppet. These weren't isolated events.
Not this time.
They were part of a system that balanced power, ceremony, and violence. Titles mattered: Basileus, Despot, Sebastocrator, each with implications for rank and political weight. The entire empire was a Game of Thrones before Game of Thrones.
He said it! He said it!
Every great fantasy world has its central city, a cultural, spiritual, or political heart. King's Landing, Minas Tirith, Luthadel, Tar-Valon, these aren't just backdrops. They're characters in their own right. Constantinople was the fantasy capital before fantasy existed. Built by Constantine on the Bosporus, it was home to over 500,000 people at its peak. Its walls were legendary, its churches opulent, its palaces sprawling. Factions like the Greens and Blues, originally chariot racing teams, had political clout and even sparked riots. The Nika riots of 532 nearly brought down Justinian's reign. What began as a sporting rivalry exploded into a citywide rebellion that burnt down much of Constantinople. It ended with 30,000 people dead in a single day.
Life in the big city.
You can feel the echoes of that in Stormlight's Kholinar siege, or King's Landing's constantly disgruntled and fragmented population. And the city itself, built on layers of history, filled with relics and surrounded by myth, is the exact blueprint fantasy cities aspire to. There's something uncanny about Byzantine aesthetics, mosaics of golden saints, the haunting chants of Greek liturgies, architecture that blends Eastern mysticism with Roman grandeur. It feels otherworldly. Fantasy often captures this through art, costume, and architecture. Not explicitly Roman, not fully Eastern, but something strange and nostalgic. It's why cities in fantasy often feel ancient, but hard to place. Byzantium walked that line for centuries. You see this in fantasy costume design. The robes, the icons, the bejeweled helmets. In settings like the Citadel and Game of Thrones, the influence is clear.
That is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen.
Even in the Elder Scrolls,
snow. We need more snow. Can't have enough snow.
the blend of decayed grandeur and theological depth channels a strong Byzantine aesthetic. Byzantium's obsession with ceremony, crowns, processions, sacred colors like purple and gold echoes directly into fantasy monarchies. The idea that an emperor's clothing or his throne room has divine significance, that's as much Theoden as it is Constantine. So, is high fantasy based on Byzantium? Well, not exactly.
You serious?
But the influence is unmistakable. The themes, structures, and even aesthetics are cut from the same historical fabric. Fantasy isn't just escapism, it's a reinterpretation of real history. And the Byzantine Empire, with its depth, contradictions, and endurance, offers some of the richest material to draw from. Whether authors know it or not, Byzantium echoes through the genre, in every fading empire, every throne room intrigue, and every sacred rite. Oh, and did I mention that Andronikos I was torn apart by a mob in the streets of Constantinople? Yeah. If you liked this video, or if you didn't like it, let me know in the comments. It really helps with the algorithm. And also like and subscribe and all that other stuff.